do not forget names because you are distracted. You forget names because some part of you goes into defense before the connection even begins. Some people hear someone's name, and 5 seconds later, it disappears. But the strange thing is that everything else does not disappear. You remember the feeling. You remember the voice. You remember the tension in your body. You remember whether the person felt cold, intrusive, too confident, hard to read, or strangely interesting. Only the name is gone, and that is not a meaningless detail, because most people who forget names easily have the same invisible mark in common. They do not enter interactions in presence. They enter in vigilance. And when the nervous system is busy trying to protect you, it does not record people the way it records threat. So maybe you do not have a problem with names. Maybe you have a problem with safety. And that changes this entire conversation. Forgetting names seems small, but it is almost never small, because names are one of the first doors into connection. They are the beginning of presence, the beginning of recognition, the beginning of the encounter. When you hear a name and it does not stay, it can look like a memory failure, but many times it is not memory failing. It is your inner world taking over the scene. It is anxiety taking up too much space, shame hijacking your attention, trauma teaching your body to monitor everything except how to relax, self-vigilance becoming so old that you no longer notice it. And that is why some people spend their entire lives saying, "I'm terrible with names. My memory is awful. I've always been this way." No, a lot of people are not naturally like this. A lot of people were trained into this state, trained to scan faces, trained to read emotional weather, trained to anticipate judgment, trained to survive socially. And people who are always trying to survive an encounter rarely manage to truly enter it. This is the part almost no one says out loud. When someone introduces themselves, many people are not actually listening. They are managing themselves. The person says their name, and another conversation starts inside. Does my expression look normal? Did I shake their hand awkwardly? Did I speak too loudly? Do they like me? Do I look insecure? Did I already seem strange? And while all of that is happening, the name passes by, fast, without landing, without real registration, not because you are incapable, but because your attention has already been captured by performance anxiety. That is the first point that hits hard because people recognize it immediately. You are not forgetting the other person's name. You are forgetting yourself inside the interaction. And that usually starts early. When someone grows up in an environment of criticism, instability, rejection, humiliation, or emotional neglect, meeting another person stops being simple. It becomes a test. It becomes a risk. It becomes a stage. It becomes a minefield. So the brain prioritizes what feels more urgent. Do not embarrass yourself. Do not get rejected. Do not look inadequate. The name loses. You were not distracted. You were on alert. And that is why some people forget names, but remember the exact energy of the person. They remember the look, the tone of voice, the tiny discomfort, the coldness hidden under politeness, the arrogance, the distance, the approval, the threat. That happens because the emotional brain does not record everything with the same value. It records first what feels relevant to protection. If your history forced you to learn shifts in mood, tension, disapproval, manipulation, or emotional risk, then maybe your mind was trained around one very specific question. Is this person safe? And not, Who is this person? It sounds similar, but it is not. The first question comes from defense. The second comes from presence. And people who live inside the first question almost always struggle with things that require inner stillness. Names require stillness, presence, reception, a minimum level of openness. But if your body arrives in armor before your mind even settles, the encounter is already compromised. You detect threat before identity. You feel the atmosphere before the person. You read risk before the name. And then later you call it bad memory. Now it gets more uncomfortable. In some cases, forgetting names is not only about anxiety, it is about emotional distance. And because a name fixes the existence of the other person, when you keep someone's name, that person stops being a generic figure. They gain shape. They enter your inner world with more force. And for people marked by abandonment, rejection, relational trauma, or painful intimacy, that is not always easy. One part of them wants connection. Another part wants to keep everything blurred. Not too clear, not too close, not too risky. So what do? They remember function, not identity. The guy from work, her friend, the guy from the gym, the woman from the meeting. But the name does not stick, because the name brings someone closer. And closeness to a wounded nervous system can trigger fear, not consciously, not intentionally, but deeply. You think you are only forgetting, but sometimes you are creating distance without realizing it. Some people do not forget names. They avoid registration. Then comes the second wound, shame. You forget a name. You feel embarrassed. You feel inadequate. You promise yourself that next time you will pay attention. But then the next interaction arrives, and you are already too tense to pay attention for real. Now, you are not just meeting someone. You are trying not to fail again. And that makes everything worse, because pressure destroys presence. The more you try to control the registration, the less natural it becomes. The more you pressure yourself, the less available you are. The more you monitor yourself, the less you absorb. And slowly, a pattern turns into a label. I'm bad with names. My brain doesn't work. This is just who I am. That is one of the cruelest mistakes the mind makes, turning adaptation into identity. You do not call it a wound, you call it personality. You do not call it protection, you call it your nature. And then you stop investigating. Most people think forgetting names only creates awkward situations. But the real cost is deeper, because it reveals that you may be living entire relationships without enough presence to truly register them. And when that happens often, your relational life starts to feel strange. You seem close, but you are not. You seem functional, but you live tense. You talk, respond, smile, participate, but you never fully descend into the encounter. It is as if there is always a sheet of glass between you and the other person. You are there, but not entirely. And that starts affecting more than memory. It affects connection. It affects intimacy. It affects magnetism. It affects trust. It affects the feeling of belonging. Because bonds are not born only from talking to people, they are born from feeling safe enough to receive them. And a lot of people never learned that. They learned how to impress. They learned how to please. They learned how to protect themselves. They learned how not to bother anyone. But they never learned how to rest in the presence of another human being. Here's the hardest truth in this video. Maybe the person's name disappears because the moment they arrive, you disappear first. Not physically, internally. Your spontaneity disappears. Your listening disappears. Your presence disappears. Your center disappears. And in its place, an automatic mode takes over: analyze, predict, control, avoid, perform, survive. So the problem was never just the name. The problem is that your mind may be treating human encounters like dangerous situations. And that explains a lot. It explains why you leave interactions feeling exhausted. It explains why you meet people and still feel like you never really met them. It explains why connection attracts you and drains you at the same time. It explains why your memory fails exactly where there is emotional charge. Because what has always been at stake was never information, it was protection. You do not lose the name, you lose the moment. So if you forget names easily, maybe it is time to stop calling yourself distracted and start asking a different question. What happens in my body when someone comes close? Do I relax or do I prepare? Do I listen or do I monitor myself? Do I meet them or do I manage the impression I am making? Because maybe your brain is not broken. Maybe it just spent too much time trying to protect you from shame, rejection, intrusion, discomfort, and exposure. But there is a price. Too much protection also erases the world. It erases faces. It erases names. It erases encounters. It erases intimacy. And there comes a point when healing is no longer about training memory. It becomes about teaching your nervous system that presence is not danger. Because when someone says their name, what should begin in that moment is not tension. It should be contact. If this video exposed something in you in an uncomfortable way, then this channel is for you. Because here, we do not talk about surface-level habits. We talk about the invisible wounds that distort the way you feel. Attach, protect yourself, and slowly lose yourself. Subscribe